It turns out that my wife is a scholar of Korea culture. And one thing that's very impressive, my impression is that Korea managed together, they worked together to bring about democracy. That people across all sorts of differences, different class differences, regional differences, somehow together they were able to create amazing, successful democratic society. And of course, took a country from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the wealthiest countries in the world in just a very short period. And so if I was going to look for a country that would had a very difficult situation, like right now I gather there's all this polarization, including between the generations and between the genders, and there's all these difficulties. But if I was going to look to a country that has taken on very difficult situations and solved it, these are tough challenges too, but I don't think they're any harder. I think it's something that a society like Korea can do if they sit down together and say, we're going to figure this out together.
안녕하세요. 뇌과학 박사 장동선입니다. 저희 오늘 또 대단한 분 모시고 인터뷰합니다. 2011년도에 노벨물리학상을 수상하신 솔 펄머터 박사님과 함께 대화를 준비하고 있는데요. 자, 오늘 다룰 주제는요, 지금 우리가 혼란한 시대를 살고 있는데 우리에게 어떤 사고법, 생각법이 필요한가에 대한 이야기를 들어보고자 합니다. 특히나 전 세계적으로 보면 정치적으로도 세대끼리도 젠더끼리도 의견이 너무 갈라져 있어서 서로 대화하지 못하는, 그리고 합의점을 찾지 못하는 문제들이 계속 드러나고 있습니다. 바로 이러한 문제들에 대해서 우리가 과학적 사고법을 통해서, 그리고 지금까지 문제를 해결해온 인간의 지혜를 과학적으로 잘 활용해서 어떻게 이러한 갈등, 분열을 해결할 수 있을까에 대한 실마리를 찾아보고자 하는데요. 철학자와 심리학자와 물리학자가 함께 모여서 이렇게 사고하면 우리가 더 좋은 답을 찾을 수 있을 것 같다 라고 이야기한 내용으로 쓴 책, 이 책에 대해서 저자 중에 한 분인 노벨 물리학상 수상하셨던 솔 펄무터 박사님에게 고견을 들어보고자 합니다. Hi Sol, it's a great pleasure to have you here on the Curious Brain Lab channel. I'd really love to talk about your last book.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm Sol Perlmutter, and I'm a professor of physics at the University of California, Berkeley. And I'm also a senior scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which is right next.
And you're a Nobel Prize laureate from 2011. So some of the people interested in physics already know you, I guess. Okay, let's jump into the book. I mean, the messages in the book really resonated with me. We have too much information, but also already biased information coming to us. I mean, it increased definitely if we look out at news, and even when we look at the USA and certain politicians making statements about drugs or actually scientific facts. Some of the statements are simply wrong. But why is it that with so many science advancements and big tools, why is it that we cannot even tell what is true, what is false, and have so much fake news and wrong judgments?
I mean, I think it may be really important to remember that this problem of trying to figure out what is true about the world and what things are people just making up, that, you talk to somebody down the street and they just came up with something, that problem has been a problem with us for all of human history. That it's a very basic human problem. And that you could say that that's the standard problem, that we are always in that state of doubt as to, wait, but what's really true about the world? And I think that what we learned over a few thousands of years is that there are approaches that help us. And I think this is a lot of why people started doing science, because they started realizing that they have no way to tell what's real, what's not real, and what's true and what's not true, unless they start to work together using some of these principled techniques. And so that's a lot of what we're discussing in this book, for example, which is that the techniques that we came up with, a lot of them are based on the complete comfort with the idea that we are often mistaken, that we often have things wrong. And also a comfort in the idea that if you work with other people who are interested in getting to the truth, that you can disagree with each other and you can fight over things, but you actually can figure things out together, and that you can build culture where people care so much about the truth that they are actually able to support each other in recognizing what's the reality in the world. That is not a common thing in daily life. but it became an approach. And I think the place that we've seen it most visibly nowadays, that you tend to find that culture of people who are really trying to figure out what's really true, is in the best of the universities and the best of the professional scientific societies. It's not true all the time. It's not true every place in those universities and those societies. People go wrong in different ways, but that was so and has been a home for that style of thinking that I think has really helped us tremendously, and it's allowed us to make this incredible technological progress that we've made in just even the past 100 years, even in our lifetime. And I think it's because we've built those subcultures and that those have become reliable ways to recognize truth, not every time, but as a whole in general. So I think that's where the source of some optimism comes from. Now, the why do we see so much more difficulty today than maybe 35 years ago or something like that? I think what happens is there are waves of communication and different technologies of communication. And every time there's been a new wave of reaching many, many people quickly, we've seen all sorts of crazy material broadcast, and people get lost and they start losing their sense of, wait, but who am I supposed to believe? But I think it's just one of those many waves that we're right now. There was a period in which people started publishing newspapers all over the place, and they published crazy newspapers, had all sorts of incorrect, ideas in them. Right now, we're living in a time where people suddenly realize that they could broadcast not only separate channels of news to separate people, but they could also, everybody could be writing their own blog. Everybody could be, putting up their own website that looked very official. And so we're in one of those periods where it's very easy to get confused by all that. That's one of the times where, in particular, these strong cultures of truth-seeking in universities, in scientific professional size, they become even more important during those periods because they act as a little bit of the flywheel to keep things moving in a positive way, even amidst all the noise. And it's not, a perfect remedy, and it's a scary to live through one of these noisy periods, but we do still have a very strong subculture that we can rely on, that of people who are really interested in trying to figure out what is true about the world. And I think that's what we should remember, that we haven't lost all that capability.
So, recap it. You would say it's basic human nature. It is not just now, but some of the problems have been always there since humans are there, like human nature. And training and education and the systems we have are powerful in educating ourselves to think better. Now, let me spin a little bit further and be more provocative. They have their ChatGPT friends, AI lovers, and teachers. So they don't even trust what other people are saying. They're at home just communicating with their AIs and believing it is teaching them all the truth of the world. I mean, could be because AI is learning human data and is very smart these days. But don't you see a danger if really people would lose the connection and the debating culture and thinking together by just becoming very lonely and isolated and having AI as a sparring partner? And we see a lot of this trend worldwide, which is worrying. Could you see this as some scenario happening to the world?
No, and maybe one way to describe this is that I think we live in a very interesting moment in history. Probably the first time in history, the first generations of humans where we have actually learned how to manage really, really big problems. When I was a child, there were 2 billion people in the world, and 2/3 of them were going to bed hungry every night. Now there are 8 billion people, and maybe less than 8% are going to bed hungry at night. It's still too many people, but it's an amazing difference that we have learned that we can handle a huge problem like feeding 8 billion people, and we didn't know we could do it. And now we know we can do that sort of thing. We learned that when a pandemic happens, it's a real problem, but we now know the tools that we can build, and we can actually cure and solve a pandemic at this stage in a way that we never in history could have before. We know that climate has changed in history in ways that completely devastated and changed civilizations. And today we're worried about a climate change possibility that is in front of us. which some people, are sure it was caused by humans and some people sure it's not. It doesn't matter. Either way, we will someday need to deal with climate change because it's happened in history many times. And for the first time ever, we know some of the tools. We know what it takes to actually maintain a climate that we can all live well in. And so all these things are new to our generations that are growing up right now. And we actually have the first time in history the possibility of building a planet where everybody is fed and clothed and educated. And that would be amazing. And yet we're also at a moment in history where we think that we've lost our ability to work together. And that partly we think some of it is caused by the very specific separate messaging that happens to people when they just look at some source of news or another source of news, or they are working in a social media outlet is only feeding them information that they already agree with. And we don't know if that's the entire reason, but it's certainly the case that we're living in a time in which in most societies around the world, we're seeing pulling apart of people's common ability to think through problems together. And that is very scary. People could imagine that we will badly hurt ourselves as a society. And so just at the moment where we had the possibility of beginning to build a planet that we all feel proud of, is also the moment in which we are starting to lose our sense of civilization as a knitting element that brings us all together. So I see this as a crucial time for us to think about how is it that we think? How is it we solve problems? And I think that the only reason that I have some optimism about all this is because I think in the end, once people recognize a problem, they're not bad at solving it. And they often can figure out what to do once they understand the problem. And it's certainly been the case that it's only been in the last 5-10 years, and even less for AI, that we've had a chance to see, oh, there's this problem. What do we do about it? I can report that when I'm with the students at the university and we're teaching a course, the nice thing is that you see students themselves understand that they don't want to be always just on their cell phone and working with AI. When you offer them the opportunity to put away the electronics and to just talk to each other, they actually are very positively disposed. They recognize that it's lonely being in the electronic world all the time, and that they start to want themselves to come together and find ways to be more interactive and personal. So I think that the problem clearly is visible, and we've now seen it, and we know that we're about to see further problems as AI becomes more sophisticated and more emotionally manipulative and capable, of doing that. And I'm sure that we will see some very bad stories that come out of that in upcoming years. But I don't think that has to be the answer where it all trends, because I think people react to it and then they understand that this isn't what they want. And even the people who are living in that electronic bubble, even the students who I'm talking about who grew up with it, even they are starting to appreciate why it is that you don't want that to be your world.
So I see you're very optimistic. It's really impressive to see that you keep that optimism. You also write about it in the book about scientific optimism. But let me frame the question differently then. Science or scientific thinking helps us in grasping what reality is, more useful way for us. I mean, you give a situation in the beginning of the book, I really loved it. It was, you have an accident, you need a heart surgery, and either you wait and take drugs, it's an easy option, or you directly have to get an operation. It's a hard option, but with risk. How do you choose? And then you give this interesting thought experiment saying, do you trust the medical doctors and experts' opinion? Or do you let a lot of people vote on this matter, whether we should do A or B? And I mean, it really illustrates very well how to take important decisions where you need expertise. But I think in the current world, what's happening is, even for issues which are very important to have an expert opinion or think truly and decide very well, you try to solve it by asking the mass, and what should we do? Like taking an audience vote on a quiz and then say, oh, 90% of people wanted this option, so let's go for surgery B. And it could be actually deciding your life. That question really illustrated very well how to take certain decisions. So if we apply this question to, let's say, very important political decisions, or how to proceed and control AI technologies, or new biological weapons, do you think the way we take decisions currently are okay? They're not optimized, right? What's your take on this?
And I think the interesting point that we actually also get to later in the book is that there are different parts of a decision. Some parts are the parts that you absolutely need to find the best expertise that you can and our best current knowledge that you can. But there are other parts of the decision that depend actually on values and judgments as to what priority is more important than what other priority. And the experts are not usually experts on the priorities and the values, but you need both. And so one of the things that we get to later in the book is techniques that people have developed for how do you combine the two in some principled way, that you want to make sure that when it's the part of the story where you're judging what's more important than what, where are my priorities, that's a place where you have a very different kind of discussion than when you have a discussion about does this particular drug cure this particular disease. That's a factual question that you need a different kind of evidence for and different kind of discussion. When it's a question of, is it more important, I don't know, when during the pandemic, is it more important to take care of the elderly or to take care of the children in school in these particular ways? Those are not judgments that an expert necessarily has anything special to say, but you want then people to think hard together about how do they make that kind of decision and where do the priorities differ in this case from where their priorities might be in a different situation. And very useful to remember to keep those questions somewhat separate, but then to bring them together when you need to make a decision, having had those separate discussions first.
So it's important to distinguish between factual decisions and judgments we make based on values.
Yep, exactly.
Right. But I think depending on different cultural backgrounds or in different countries, you have different ways of dealing with both. For example, I was born and raised in Germany. I think from the early education on, I think I've been trained in distinguishing both my value judgments and factual decisions. I think it's very much in the German education system, how you train even children to not mix them both up. I would say in many Asian countries, like in Korea or maybe in the Middle East or South America, where family or groups are much more important in thinking, it's usually not so easy to distinguish between factual decisions and value judgments.
And I think the United States, people are not necessarily as good at that either.
Right.
There are other ways that the cultures can mix them.
It's a sensitive topic, but I would say American politics currently is a good example that you are not bringing out actually a wisdom of a crowd, but rather than you have a very strongman oriented way of deciding. How can you break this kind of situation?
It's a very difficult challenge, of course, that we see in front of us right now. And I think the places that I think have the most room for maneuver is the fact that I've been in situations where you actually get together with people who are on opposite sides of this polarized divide, and you start them having actual conversations with each other. And even the very act of beginning those conversations where you have people think through curiosity of what is it that the other person is thinking and what are they after and what are their goals, they very quickly discover, my impression is usually they discover that actually people's values are quite similar to each other and their goals are actually much more similar than they think. And they have been told that the other side is terrible and they have all the wrong goals and all the wrong values. But when they actually talk to each other, they realize actually they share most of what they're after. They just have different understandings of the reality of the world they're acting on. But it makes a big difference if they recognize that the other side isn't terrible. They're not mean, vicious people. They're actually well-meaning people who are trying their best to make a good world. And that by itself changes, I think, how people then vote and how they, what they're looking for in leaders. So there's a sense that if we can get down to the grassroots people, that could help in all this work. Now it's slow is the problem. And so the other element of the story that I've been looking and talking to people about is, can we try to get some extra help from these automated social media environments that people are living in nowadays? It doesn't take much. Slightly change the algorithms for what people are getting recommended and what they're being shown to each other. Very tiny changes can change whether people get driven apart in how they're thinking or whether they start understanding each other. And they don't necessarily have to agree, but if they understand what the other side is thinking and why they're thinking it, that by itself can change the dynamic of a society. So I'm looking both this retail, if every individual person found one person that they disagreed with that they could talk to, that would make a huge difference. It's a slow way to go. The other one is the wholesale route, which is if we could try and find the possibility of just slight changes in the algorithms, they could bring people to understand each other rather than pull each other into. And I don't think it's any less likely you could make a profit as a social media company if you did that as if you did the other.
So instead of dividing, are you for A or B, because that will inherently lead to conflict, you would ask, why do you think A is better? Why do you think B is better? What do you ultimately want?
Exactly. And then you could argue over, but I don't think you're getting what you want. That's a different question. And then people feel more like they share the same goal. Now they're just trying to figure out, how do we do it? And that's a much safer disagreement, because now it's not a personal, it's not putting your whole sense of your goodness as a person at stake. Now it's just a practical question of, how do we get something that we both want?
So now I want to go to the last question. Your book just came out in Korea. If you want to send a message to our Korean readers, Korean viewers, is there a message you specifically want to tell our Korean viewers?
It turns out that my wife is a scholar of Korea culture. And so she goes to visit Korea a few times a year and interviews people and talks to people. And so I hear a little bit about Korea through her. And she's told me about a lot of the history and about the experiences. And one thing that's very impressive, my impression is that Korea managed together, they worked together to bring about democracy, that people across all sorts of differences, different class differences, regional differences, somehow together they were able to create amazing, successful democratic society, and of course took a country from one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the wealthiest countries in the world in just a very short period. It's a country that has this capability to do these things that you don't know that anybody could do. And so if I was going to look for a country that would had a very difficult situation, like right now I gather there's all this polarization, including between the generations and between the genders, and there's all these difficulties. But if I was going to look to a country that has taken on very difficult situations and solved it, it seems to me Korea is one of the places that should say, okay, these are our problems. We can think through them together. We can look at what are our basic goals and values that we all share, and we can figure out what to do about it. I think this would be one of the demonstration countries for the rest of the world if Korea took this on and said, we are going to figure out this problem and we're going to solve it, and we're going to figure out how to talk to each other in a thoughtful, humble way where we listen to what it is that everybody's worried about and what it is that they value and what it is they want. And we come up with solutions. We come up with ways to solve the problems. And I think that would be just wonderful to watch Korea do that same exercise again that they've done before in these other very difficult situations. I mean, going from the poorest countries in the world to one of the wealthiest countries, going from society that did not have democracy to democracy, those are really tough challenges. These are tough challenges too, but I don't think they're any harder. I think it's something that a society like Korea can do if they sit down together and say, we're going to figure this out together.
Okay, thank you so much for the interview. And it was overall a great pleasure to have this conversation. Thank you, Saul.
A real pleasure and wonderful to hear you've been thinking about too.
Thank you. 오늘 대화가 정말 너무 즐거워서 사실 제 마음이라면 인터뷰를 훨씬 더 길게 하고 싶었지만 벌써 인터뷰가 끝난 게 아쉬울 정도로 좋았던 인터뷰였습니다. 오늘 대화를 하면서 느껴졌던, 그리고 굉장히 저를 다시 생각하게 했던 부분은 뭐냐면요, 엄청나게 펄머터 박사님이 낙관적이셨어요. 그러니까 책에서는 이야기하고 있는 scientific optimism, 과학적 낙관주의가 정말 본인의 사고와 삶에 묻어난다라는 느낌을 가졌는데요. 전 이게 정말 좋았습니다. 왜냐하면 요즘 세상 많은 뉴스들을 보고 또 책을 읽고 많은 생각을 하다가도 우울해지는 순간이 많아요. 이대로 괜찮을까? 우리 정말 저 끔찍한 세상으로 가는 건 아니야? 지금 시대가 왜 이럴까? 이런 생각을 많이 하게 되는데 인간은 늘 그래 왔어. 신문이 처음 나왔을 때도 온갖 가짜뉴스가 판쳤고 처음에 인터넷이 나왔을 때도 좋은 정보만 있는 게 아니라 쓰레기 정보들이 많이 돌아다녔고 지금 AI의 시대에 일어나고 있는 변화도 완전히 새로운 것은 아니라 인류는 늘 새로운 기술이 나올 때마다 새로운 문제들을 봐왔고 또 그것을 해결해왔다 라고 담담하게 얘기하시는 모습에서 좀 위안을 받았습니다. 그리고 무엇보다도 우리가 과학적 사고법을 가지고 어떠한 개념 두고 어떠한 툴들을 어떻게 사용하느냐에 따라서 우리는 분명히 좋은 답을 찾을 수 있다. 분열되어 있고 갈등되어 있는 사람들조차도 우리가 원하는 세상이 뭐고 더 좋아지는 것이 무엇이냐라고 하는 근본적인 가치를 가지고 이야기하면 사실은 그렇게 다른 이야기를 하고 있는 게 아닐 수도 있다. 합의점을 찾을 수 있다라고 하는 굉장히 긍정과 낙관의 마인드. 근데 이게 그냥 다 좋아질 거야 이런 긍정이 아니라 우리가 여태껏 이룩한 것들 그리고 우리의 과학적인 사고 이 모든 것들을 보면 앞으로도 우리는 잘 나갈 수 있어. 이러한 굳은 믿음을 가지고 계신 것 같아서 굉장히 인상적이었고 그리고 실제로 더 많은 사람들이 이러한 과학적 사고법, 넥스트 띵킹에 나오는 더 좋은 답을 낼 수 있는 툴들을 알고 있으면 좋겠다. 많은 사람들이 참고했으면 좋겠다 이런 생각을 했습니다. 그래서 솔직히 말하면 저는 올해 읽었던 책 중에서 탑3에 꼽는 책 꼽으라면 넥스트 띵킹 꼽을 수 있을 것 같고 오늘 소울 펄머터 박사님하고 이야기한 내용 인상 깊으셨고 더 많이 알고 싶다면 이 넥스트 띵킹 책을 참고해 보셔도 좋을 것 같습니다. 자, 오랜만에 뇌가 열리고 세상을 바라보는 시각이 더 넓어질 수 있는 그런 경험을 해서 좋았고요. 여러분도 끊임없이 스스로의 세상 안에 자신을 가둬두지 말고 내가 경험할 수 있는, 생각할 수 있는 세상을 더 넓혀 나가기를 기원하면서 오늘 영상을 마치도록 하겠습니다.